All right, welcome to the Jewish Roots Life Group, where we are celebrating Purim. And we're going to read from the scroll of Esther, and we're going to celebrate, and we're going to do some Jewish customs. But before we do, let's start off with a typical Jewish custom prayer. And here it is. The prayer of blessing for Purim. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the reading of the Megillah, Book of Esther, who performed miracles for our forefathers in those days at this time, and who has granted us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this occasion. Amen.
Amen.
And just so happens that today is Purim, the celebration of Purim. All right, so let's get started. Now, it was in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. We're going to stop there and look here. King Xerxes is his name in, he was Persian, so this is his Persian name. His Hebrew name is right here, and from Strong's Concordance is Achashverosh. And I'm going to say Xerxes because it's easier. So here's what his name means in Hebrew. When you take each letter, you have the Aleph, Chet, Shin, Vav, Resh, Vav, Shin. And when you put them together, you get a strong leader who is a doorway to life through a crushing, but there is a connection to the poor to connect them with a change or return. That's the king, and you'll see all of that play out here when we go. So King Xerxes reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. That was almost the entire known world at that time. And if you want to see what it looked like, there it is. There's the map. It engulfed all of this all the way down to Ethiopia, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, part of India, all the way up into Russia, Turkey, Syria, all the way up into Greece. That was his known province. So 127 provinces from this area. The capital is right here where the star is. It's almost on the border of Iran and Iraq, and the capital is called Susa. And right there it is. And that capital will play a big part in the story. So I just wanted to give you a map and show you where things happened and how many this red is his area of how much he controlled. All right, so chapter 1, he gives a huge feast and celebration for 180 days, that's 6 months, to all the nobles, and it would be our governors, mayors, chiefs of staffs, military leaders, all the important people he gave, because he wanted to show appreciation. He wanted to show his wealth, so he put a party for 180 days in all. When that was completed, he gave another party for 7 days for all the people that were in the capital. And the citadel is in Susa. When you hear citadel, it means the capital. So he gave a 7-day feast for everybody in the courtyard. Watch this. There were curtains of fine white, violet linen fastened with cords of fine purple and silver rings. What does that curtain remind you of or sound familiar of? The ones in the tabernacle and the temple. All right? Couches of gold and silver rested on the mosaic floor, and the royal wine was plentiful. It had to be to throw a party for 180 days. All right, so during that 7 days, it says the drinking was carried on in accordance to the law, and he compelled everybody to drink. And Queen Vashti also held a separate banquet for the women in the palace of King Xerxes. So here's where it gets interesting. On the 7th day, the last day of the feast, when the king's heart was joyful with wine, wonder what that means, he commanded his eunuchs to summon Queen Vashti to wear her royal crown and display her beauty for everybody to see. But Queen Vashti refused to come. This made the king very, 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 very angry, and it says he burned with rage. Now there's a problem. His advisors came to him and said, look, this is going to make us look bad. Because she refused the king, every male is going to be refused by their wives because the queen did. So they think they can get away with it too. So he says, according to the law, what can be done about this? It said, Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the king, the message was conveyed by the eunuchs. She not only wronged the king, but all of the officials and all the people in all the provinces. So if it pleases the king, let a royal command be issued by the king and be written in the law of the Persians and Medes. So it cannot be repealed or modified, that Vashti the queen is no longer to come before King Xerxes. In other words, she's going to be banished, sent away.
She's going, woo, woo.
Yeah, that's it. So that the king's great decree proclaimed throughout the kingdom, all women will give honor to their husbands, from the great to the insignificant. So the statement and advice pleased the king, so he sent the letters to all the provinces, and that's what happened. He vanquished the queen. Then after all these things, and his anger subsided, he remembered what Vashti had done and the decree he made against her. But his attendants said to him, hey, we have an idea. Let beautiful women and virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint administrators in all the provinces and have them gather all the beautiful young virgins to the citadel in Susa. And his king eunuch, Haggai, who's in charge of all the women, or the harem is what it says, will make all the beauty preparations. This pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Now let's stop here and think about it for a quick second. 127 provinces. How many beautiful women do you think you can round up from 127 provinces? Just saying. All right? So, there was a certain Jew in the citadel whose name was Mordecai. He was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. All right? Now, why is this important? There are 3 Benjamites that are very famous in the Bible. The first Benjamite is King Saul, right before King David. The second Benjamite is Mordecai. And the third Benjamite mentioned is another Saul, later known as Paul in the New Testament. So all 3 of those were Benjamites from the tribe of Benjamin. All right, so he was from the tribe of Benjamin. He had been deported from Jerusalem when all of the king Jeconiah and they had King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylonia in the exile. He was the guardian over Hadassah. And Hadassah is the real name of Esther. But the reason we say Esther is because that's her Persian name. So Hadassah, which is Esther, was taken over by Mordecai because she had no father and mother, and the young woman was more beautiful in form and in face when Mordecai took her in as his own daughter. In other words, she was hot. All right, so Mordecai gets the idea to send her to the king to enter the big beauty contest, to be queen. All right. So it came, when the king's command decree proclaimed that many young women were gathered together in the citadel of Susa, in the custody of Haggai, which is the eunuch, that Esther was taken to the king's palace and put in place with Haggai, the charge of the women. Now the young women pleased Haggai, the eunuch, and found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with beauty preparations and her portion of food, and gave her 7 choice maids. So Esther was given 7 maids to attend to her. Esther did not reveal the Jewish background of her people or her family, for Mordecai instructed her not to do so. But every day Mordecai, who was an attendant of the king's court, he was a guard at the royal palace, walked back and forth in front of the courtyard to check on Esther and see how she was doing. Here's a map of the tribe of Benjamin where Mordecai and Esther are from, if you wanted to see back in those days. Now it's at 127 provinces. Here are 12. One from each of the tribe of Israel. All right, here's the royal treatment. When it was each young woman's turn to go before the king, at the end of their 12 months under regulations, days of beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet spices and perfume. So each woman got a year's worth of beauty treatments. Now how much would you pay? But anything they wanted, they'd take care of, and the eunuchs would take care of her. And then what the king would do is, if he liked you, he would have his way. Then after he had his way, he'd send you into the harem where the eunuchs would take care of you. Now, in the custody of Shaagaz, that's one of the eunuchs, he was in charge of the concubines. The ones that were sent to there would never return to the king unless you were requested. Now, as far as Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her in as his own daughter, when her turn came to come to the king, she requested nothing. She didn't take anything. And Esther found favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to the king Xerxes to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, which is around December or January, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king loved Esther more than any other woman. And she found favor and kindness with him more than all the other virgins. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen in the place of Vashti. Love at first sight. Typical love at first sight. Here you go. So when all the other women came, it didn't matter. Esther had not revealed her identity to the king or her Jewish background, for Mordecai advised her not to. So the king at this time didn't know that she was a Jew. So here is where the plot thickens. So in those days, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, because that was his job. There were 2 men named Bigtan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the door. They became angry at the king and conspired to attack him. But the plot became known to Mordecai, who informed Queen Esther. Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. When the plot was investigated, it was true, and both men were hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of Chronicles. And this is very, very important because it plays a very big important role here in the next couple chapters. Here's the 2 names of the men that were plotting to kill the king, and I'll tell you what those names mean, because everything means something, right? It's recorded in the book of history. This is going to play a big point in chapter 6. All right? Here's their names. The first one is Bet Gimel Tav Nun. Bet is on the inside. Gimel is pride lifted up. Tav is as a sign, and Nun of deliverance. So his name means on the inside, pride is being lifted up as a sign of deliverance, which means he wants to kill the king to be delivered from his reign.
How do you pronounce his name?
Bigtan.
Bigtan?
Yep. And now Teresh. All right. Teresh is Tav Resh Shin. A covenant was made, Tav, Reish to a man in charge or of authority, and Sheen to crush, kill, or destroy. So you have these two in a plot to kill the king. And it says it in their names, and they're specifically named.
How's the mama know to name this kid that?
I know, right?
Mama named him kid that.
All right, so here it is. That was important that Mordecai told Esther to tell the king what was going on. So after these days, King Xerxes here we go. After these days, King Xerxes promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the officials that were with him. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate, all of them bowed down and honored and paid homage to, for this is what the king commanded to regard him. But Mordecai, a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, neither bowed down nor paid homage to him. Then all the king's servants got together and said, "Hey, you got to pay homage to him. Don't you know what you're doing?" Mordecai said, "Nope, I ain't doing it." Now when it happened, when they spoke to Mordecai day after day, he would not listen to them. And then they told to see whether Mordecai's reason for his behavior was valid. That's when he told them that he was a Jew. So when saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, this made him absolutely furious. But he disdained laying hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were, his nationality, Jews. So Haman determined to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who lived throughout the kingdom of Xerxes. And we're going to pause it right here. 127 provinces, most of the known world. So this is one time in history of the world where an edict was made by the king to kill all the known Jews. All right? In the first month of Nisan, which is around March or April, which is where we are, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, cast Pur. Now the word Pur in Hebrew is lot. Purim, when you put an I-M at the end, it makes it plural. It makes it lots. So he cast lot day after day to find the lucky day to kill all the Jews. So what he did is he cast lots to find out what day he was going to make the edict to kill all the Jews. So when he did this, it fell on, which is now today, in the month of Adar, which is February to March. Then said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the province in your kingdom. Their laws are different from all those of all the other people. They do not observe the king's laws. Therefore, it is not in the king's interest to tolerate them and let them stay here. So if it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the treasury to have them killed." How much is 10,000 talents? I looked it up. 10,000 talents is 375 tons of silver.
Wow. It was rich.
So the king granted it, and he gave him his signet ring to seal the deal. All right, then the king removed his signet ring with a special ring with seal and gave it to the son of Hammedatha the Agite, the enemy of the Jews. Then the king said to, "The silver is given to you, and the people also. Do with them as you please." So what the silver was for was to go to all the provinces and pay people to kill all the Jews.
Boom.
That's right. Then the king's scribes all got together and wrote it all up and sent it to all the provinces, just as had commanded, and sealed the deal. And they were sent to all the king's provinces to destroy and kill and annihilate the Jews. So here you see. Now, the couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued at the citadel, which is the capital, while the king sat down to drink. And the city of Susa, the capital, was perplexed by the unusual and alarming decree. They wanted to know what the heck was going on. Now here's where the plot thickens. When Mordecai learned of everything that had been done, he tore his clothes in mourning and put on sackcloth and ashes, went out to the center of the city and cried out loudly and bitterly and wailed. He went out only as far as the king's gate, because no one was to enter the king's gate dressed in sackcloth. In each and every province that the decree was made, and there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and their eunuchs came and told her what happened, the queen Esther was seized by great fear. She sent garments to Mordecai so that he could remove his sackcloth. Now, she sent a message to Mordecai through one of the eunuchs, and Mordecai told her everything that had happened and the edict and everything and what had happened. So Mordecai told everything that happened and the exact amount of money that had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Now the eunuch came back and told Esther everything he said. They sent messages back and forth from Mordecai to Esther. And so it says, all the king's servants and people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes before the king to the inner court without being summoned, he has but one law, and that is be put to death. So Mordecai says, you got to go tell the king. And Esther says, I can't. If I go to the king without being summoned, he'll kill me. By law, he'll kill me unless he holds out the scepter, and then that's accepted. So that's what she was scared of, and that's what gripped her. And then Mordecai said to her, and this is, here we go, the biggest part of Esther, the book of Esther. Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, don't imagine that just because you're in the king's palace you can escape any more than all the rest of us Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from some other place, and you and your father's house will perish since you did nothing about it. And who knows if you were made for such a time as this. One of the most well-quoted parts of the Bible for Esther. Who knows if you were made for just a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews that are present and observe a fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days and 3 nights. I and my maids will do the same fast in the same way. Then, after those 3 days of fasting, I will go before the king without being summoned, which is against the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did exactly as was commanded. So here's everything we just went over. So Esther plans a banquet. On the 3rd day, after the fasting, Esther put on her royal robes, stood in the inner court of the king's palace opposite his throne room. The king was sitting on his throne, facing the main entrance. When the king saw Esther, the queen was standing in the courtyard. she found favor in his sight. The king extended the golden scepter, so Esther approached, which means she's not going to die. Then the king said, "What is it you want?" She said, "What is your request? If it pleases the king, may the king and come this day to a banquet that I've prepared." So what her request to the king was, "I'm going to throw a party for you and Haman." The king said, "Okay, bring quickly, so we may do as Esther says." So the king and came to the banquet which was prepared, and they drank wine, and the king said to Esther, "What is your request? And it shall be granted to you up to half the kingdom." And Esther said, "If it pleases the king, and I found favor in your sight, my petition is that the king and come to a banquet that I'll prepare for you tomorrow. And then I'll do everything the king asks and let you know my petition then." Aha! So now went away that day joyful and in good spirits and happy. But as he was leaving, he saw Mordecai at the king's gate refusing to stand up or show fear before him. He was filled with rage at Mordecai. Nonetheless, controlled himself and went home. There he sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then recounted them the glory of his riches and everything he'd done and all the things he had been given from the king. So then said, "Even Queen Esther made a banquet for me and made one for tomorrow. So I'm invited by her to go with the king. Yet all this doesn't matter as long as Mordecai the Jew sits at the king's gate." Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully to the banquet with the king." And that advice pleased, so he had the gallows made. Now, if you'll see here, it says 50 cubits, which is about 75 feet. The average telephone pole is about 45 feet. Where they got a tree that big, I have no idea. And when it says gallows, it's not the gallows that we think of in the Western days. It's just one big pole. They usually impaled people. Hanging by a rope wasn't the custom back then. Usually it was impalement. So, keep that in mind. Exactly. So here's where everything comes into play. Do you remember when Mordecai heard about the plot? All right, here we go. So on that night, remember Queen Esther is fixing a banquet in the morning for him, right? So on that night, the king couldn't sleep. And the book of records was ordered to be brought out. And they read from the book of records. And they found there where Mordecai had reported that Bigthana and Teresh and the eunuchs, who were the doorkeepers, had planned to kill him. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been given to Mordecai for this?" Nothing. And while he was saying this, "Wait a minute," the king said, "who is in the court?" Now had just entered the outer court and the king's palace to ask the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he just made for him. And the king's servant said, "Look, it's standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So came in, and the king said, "Hey, what is to be done for a man whom the king desires to honor?" Now thought to himself, "Ooh, hey, he must be talking about me. Oh, let me tell you what you can do. Who would know them more than I would?" So said to the king, Oh, for a man whom the king desires. Let a royal robe be brought that the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on his head the royal crown be placed. And let the robe and the horse be handed over to the king's most noble officials. Let him dress the man in the king delights, and lead him on horseback throughout the open square and the whole city to proclaim before him, this is what shall be done for whom the king desires to honor. Woohoo! All right. Then the king said to, quickly, take the royal robe and the horse, as you have said, and do this for Mordecai the Jew. Now wait a minute. The king knows what Mordecai is, because he called him the Jew. Right? All right. Leave nothing out that you've said. So, took the royal robe and the horse and dressed Mordecai and led him through the open square. Woo! Then Mordecai returned, after it was all over, he returned to the gate, but hurried to his own house, crying and mourning with his head in his hands, covered in sorrow. Then told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that happened. Then his wise counselors and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before you have begun to fall in status, is of Jewish heritage, you will not overcome him, but certainly fall. So think about that. His own wife and his advisor said, if he's a Jew, you ain't going to win, and you will fall before him. So while they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought to the banquet that Esther was prepared. Right? So the king drank wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day, as they drank their wine, what is your petition, queen? And it shall be granted to you half of the kingdom, it shall be yours. Then the queen replied, if I've found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be spared as my petition, and my people be spared as my request. For we have been sold. I and my people are to be destroyed and killed and wiped out of existence. Now, if we've been sold as slaves, I would remain silent. Then King Xerxes asked the Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? Who dares to do a such thing? And Esther said, an adversary, an enemy of the Jews is this evil man. Then became terrified before the king and queen. Then in his rage, the king stood up from drinking wine, went out into the palace garden to think about what he should do. But stayed and pled for his life to Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was fixing to come to him.
No.
So when the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they'd been drinking wine, was falling on the couch before where Esther was. Woo. Then the king said, will he even attempt to assault the queen with me in the palace? As the king spoke these words, the servant covered face in preparation for execution. When they covered his face, that is where they get the tradition for Purim to wear masks and cover your faces. So they covered his face for execution. Then one of the eunuchs serving the king says, now look, there are gallows standing high in house, which made for Mordecai, whose good warning saved the king. Remember? And the king said, hang him on it. So they hang on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsided.
Yay!
Yes. Oh, wait, but it gets better. So on that day, oh, we're getting to that later. On that day, King Xerxes gave the house of the enemy of the Jews to Queen Esther and Mordecai, because Esther had now disclosed the relation that he was to her. So now the king knows she's a Jew and he's a Jew.
And he's her uncle.
That's right. So he took off his signet ring that he had taken away from and gave it to Mordecai. So Mordecai now has the king's signet ring. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of the house of... Then Esther spoke again to the king and fell down at his feet and cried and wept and implored him to avert the evil plot of the Agagite and his plan which he devised against the Jews. But the king's decree is such. Also concerning the Jews, he says, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by which he wrote in order to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the tragedy that will happen to my people? Or how can I endure the destruction of my kindred? Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai, behold, I have given Esther the house of... And they have hanged him on the gallows because he stretched out his hand against the Jews. Now, here's where the problem lies. Once the king writes the decree, remember he wrote decree that to kill all the Jews. Once it's sealed, it can never be revoked. So here's what happens. Woohoo! So all the scribes came together on the 3rd month, which is in the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and all the governors got together, and all the ones from 127, so they got everybody, all the 127 provinces. All right, and they to see what could be done. So he, Mordecai, wrote a decree in the name of King Xerxes and sealed it with the king's ring and sent letters on couriers on horseback riding to all the 127 provinces. In it, the king granted the Jews who were in every province the right to assemble and defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force that might attack them, their children and women, and to take the enemy's goods as plunder. So all the provinces of King Xerxes, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the edict was issued as law to every province. Then Mordecai departed from the presence of the king in a royal apparel of blue and white, with a large crown of gold and a robe of fine linen and purple wool. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced, for the Jews had light of hope, a dawn of hope and gladness, of joy and honor. And in every province, in every city where the king commanded decree arrived, the Jews celebrated with gladness and joy and a feast and a holiday. And many among the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews and their God had fallen on them. So let's see how this plays out. So on the 12th month, on the day when the edict was about to be executed, on that very day when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to gain power over them and slaughter them, it happened the other way around. So that the Jews themselves gained power over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in the cities and all the provinces, and guess what? All the leaders, all the governors and mayors sided with the Jews. All right? No one could stand before them. The fear of them and their God had fallen all the people. And even the officials of the provinces supported the Jews in defeating the enemies. So the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, destroying them. Now here's where it gets interesting. Here's what they happened, and here's where it gets very, very interesting. At the citadel, the capital, The Jews had destroyed 500 men and killed, and it lists all 10 sons of Haman, and it gives all their names. Oh, I'm sorry. It gives all 10 sons of... I didn't see that one. The Jews' enemy, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. So they killed sons, all 10 of them, but they didn't take anything. So on that day, the number that was killed in the citadel was reported to the king. The king said to Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of... When they have done, what then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition, queen, and it shall be granted to you. Esther replied, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to act tomorrow in accordance with the decree today, and let the dead bodies of 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded it to be done, and the decree was given, and they hanged the bodies of 10 sons. Now I'm going to stop right here. They were already dead, and she said, hang them tomorrow, but they're already dead. When we come back next semester, there's a whole teaching on this, because this is a prophecy that was later fulfilled. She was prophesying about these 10 sons being hanged on the gallows. There's your teaser. All right, so now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled. On the 14th day they rested and made a day of feasting and rejoicing. Yay! So that's what happened. So Mordecai recorded all these events, and he sent letters, and he said, obliging them to celebrate on the 14th day of the month of Adar, that we would celebrate Purim. Because they turned them from grief to joy, from mourning to a holiday. Now, for the son of the Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, he had plotted against the Jews to destroy them because he cast Purim. That is lots. That's what we said. But when it came before the king, he commanded that in writing that wicked scheme which he had devised against the Jews returned on his own head. So he's recording all this in the book of history. So now, are you ready for this? The days of Purim, all because of what had happened. So they would not fail to celebrate. In these days to be remembered, celebrate through every generation, every family, every province, every city. Purim was never to cease from among the Jews, according to the proclamation of Mordecai, and established these days of Purim to be observed at their appointed times, just as Mordecai had instructed. Now are you ready for the good stuff?
Yes.
Yes.
But wait! There's more. Of course there's more. Here's the more. We've been talking about Purim. The two main characters obviously are Mordecai and Esther, right? So what's in a name? Let's look at Mordecai. All right, Mordecai is made of the Mem, the Resh, the Dalet, Kaf, and Yud. All right, what does it mean? Mem, probation or renewal. Resh, sufficiency of God. Dalet, support. Kaf, salvation. And the Yud, a divine deed. So look, there's a time of probation or renewal from the sufficiency of God to support the salvation of the Jews by a divine deed. That's in the name of Mordecai.
Wow.
What about Esther? Queen Esther. All right, we're going to look at both of them. The Persian name Esther is made from the Aleph, Samek, Tav, and Resh. Right? What does it mean? Aleph, a strong leader. Samek, support. Tav, ordained time. And Resh, sufficiency of God. So in the name of Esther, you have a strong leader that gives support at an ordained time from the sufficiency of God, who noted she was made for a time such as this. How about the Hebrew name Hadassah? That's her Persian name. How about her Hebrew name Hadassah?
Hot.
There you go. Hadassah. That's right, Hadassah.
Hadassah.
Her name actually comes from a tree, the myrtle tree, that gives healing. But when you take the letters, it's the He, the Dalet, the Samach, and the He. He is revelation and grace. Dalet, pathway. Samach, support. He, revelation and grace. So if you put it all together, revelation and grace is a pathway through support to revelation and grace. Guess what it says in John 1:16? We are to move from grace to grace. It says, indeed, we have all received grace after grace from his fullness. All from the name. Now how are you seeing it? How are you seeing why they celebrate? Okay, are you ready to celebrate?
Yes.
All right, let's stand up and let's celebrate because it's time to rejoice. And I know you know this song, so we're going to sing this song. Are you ready? There we go. And this is Purim here. Purim is all about Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. God's name is never mentioned in the book of Esther. Even when you can't see him, he's working. Never stops. He never stops working. This is Purim. This is the celebration of Purim.
Even when I can't see it, you're working.
Even when you can't feel it, he's working. He never stops working.
Never stop working. You never stop. You never stop.
This is Esther singing for all the Jews.
You're working. Even when I can't feel it, you're working.
You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I can't see it, you're working. Even when I can't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Because
Miracle worker,
promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. It's a celebration. That's who he is. Miracle worker. That's who you are. Promise keeper. That is who you are. Waymaker. That's who you are. Miracle worker. That's who you are. Purim saver. That's who he is. Waymaker, miracle you are, miracle worker, that's who you are, promise keeper, that is who you are.
that's who you are. Miracle worker, that's who you are. Promise keeper,
That is who you are.
that is who you are.
Happy Purim.
Happy Purim!
Happy Purim.
That's one of